At 10:28 on tonight, two fires that firefighters had been tracking as separate problems became one enormous problem. And the number that came out of that merger should stop you in your tracks. Over 40,000 acres, 0% contained, and still growing while most of the state was asleep. This is the story of how a quiet Oregon fire season turned in the span of about 2 weeks into one of the worst the state has seen in 30 years. It is a story about a river town called Warm Springs, about a fire that jumped a highway, about crews stretched so thin that volunteer ranchers are running out of fuel for their own trucks, and about a smoke crisis now blanketing more than a dozen counties. Stay with this one, because the numbers only get bigger from here. Let's start where the emergency is sharpest right now. Near the community of Warm Springs in Jefferson County, a wildfire called the Bench Fire broke out on July 23rd. It was small at first, a few thousand acres, the kind of Ignition Central Oregon crews deal with constantly during a dry summer. But by Saturday, July 25th, hot, dry, windy conditions pushed it past 6,000 acres, and it jumped the Deschutes River, which is not something a fire is supposed to be able to do easily. That single development forced level 3, go now, evacuation orders, for the entire Warm Springs Reservation and surrounding parts of Jefferson County. Highway 26 was shut down overnight between Warm Springs and Madras, while crews tried to slow it down. At the same time, a second fire, the Beachcomb fire, was burning nearby, consuming the same kind of tinder-dry fuel in the gap between the two blazes. Fire behavior analysts call this a classic fuel bridge scenario. Two separate fires close enough together that the unburned vegetation between them is essentially a wick waiting to be lit. That is exactly what happened. Sunday, wind speeds picked up again, and the dry fuel connecting the two fires ignited, merging Bench and Beachcomb into a single perimeter. Officials made it official that evening. One fire, now carrying the Bench Fire name, sitting at just over 40,296 acres, 0% contained. It's worth understanding why fire officials treat a merger like this as a genuinely different kind of event, not just an addition of two numbers on a map. When two fire perimeters combine, the newly merged fire often behaves differently than either fire did on its own. It can generate its own local wind patterns as superheated air rises and pulls in surface winds from multiple directions, a phenomenon that produces erratic, hard-to-predict fire behavior even without any change in the surrounding regional weather. It also means firefighting resources that had been split between two separate incident command structures now need to consolidate, reassess priorities, and in some cases physically relocate equipment and personnel, all while the fire itself is still actively spreading. That reorganization takes time, and time is the one resource crews don't have when containment sits at 0%. The human cost of that merger is not abstract. Fire officials have confirmed at least 6 primary residences and 5 outbuildings destroyed, with damage assessment teams still working through the burn area to determine the final count. Roughly 2,400 people evacuated from the area as the fire closed in. Evacuation zones now cover the Warm Springs Agency District, including several residential neighborhoods, apartment complexes, and trailer courts, along with areas around Pelton Park, Pelton Dam, Dry Hollow, and Lake Semtustus. The fire has established 3 separate active fronts pushing toward the Warm Springs. Community, which means firefighters aren't just defending one line, they're defending 3 at once, with extreme fire behavior, wind-driven runs, and long-range spotting complicating every attempt to build containment. As of the most recent update, containment remains at 0%. Crews have made some tactical progress, cutting in dozer and hand lines and completing. DS and a strategic firing operation was carried out over the weekend to try to rob the main fire of fuel before it reaches populated areas. But 0% containment on a 40,000-acre fire means the fight is still almost entirely defensive. Here's what makes this moment different from a typical bad fire week. The Bench Fire is not an isolated crisis. It's one of dozens of major incidents burning across the state right now, and several of them are individually larger than Bench. About 150 miles to the east, in Wheeler County near the small town of Fossil, a cluster of lightning-caused fires ignited on July 15th and 16th during a single thunderstorm that produced more than 100 lightning strikes across the county. That cluster is now known as the Roe Creek Complex, and it has become the defining fire, even TE of the season so far in terms of scale and speed. Within about a week, it had grown past 130,000 acres. By July 26, it stood at 208,759 acres and 31% contained, the most progress made on any of Oregon's largest fires. Governor Tina Kotek did a statewide conflagration response to bring in additional personnel. At its peak, nearly only 300 firefighters were assigned to the complex, supported by dozens of engines, dozers, and water tenders. The fire forced the closure of a stretch of Highway 26 between Prineville and Mitchell, shut down Bureau of Land Management land along both banks of the John Day River from Service Creek to the Columbia River, enclose the Clarno and Painted Hills units of the John Day Fossil Beds National Monument, one of the region's most visited geological sites. Several outbuildings have been lost, and Level 3 evacuation orders have covered large sections of Wheeler County from Clarno to Mitchell. The Roe Creek Complex is a useful example of how these megafires actually form, because it didn't start as one fire at all. The original lightning storm ignited more than a dozen separate fires scattered across Wheeler County, with names like Camel Hump, Cove Creek, Crosswhite, Deep Canyon, Pat's Cabin, Parish, Red Rock, and Twickenham, along with several unnamed numbered incidents. Over the following days, as hot, dry, windy weather pushed each of those individual fires outward, most of them burned into one another and consolidated into what's now simply called the Crow S-White Fire, the dominant fire within the broader complex. Only a handful of the original ignition points, Crosswhite, Camel Hump, Parish, and Deep Canyon, remain distinct enough to still carry their own names and containment figures. This pattern, dozens of small lightning-caused starts merging into a handful of massive complexes within a week or two, is exactly what turned Oregon's fire season from routine to historic, almost overnight. Further southeast, along the Oregon-Idaho border near Jordan Valley in Malheur County, sits what has become the largest actively burning fire in the state, the Big Grass Fire. Estimates from federal and state sources place it somewhere between roughly 197,000 and 280,000 acres, depending on the reporting window, with containment holding at just 5%. That range itself tells you something about how fast this fire is moving and how hard it is to even nail down a stable perimeter. It's burning through rangeland covered in low, dry grass and brush, fuel that carries fire extremely fast when wind picks up. Level 3. Go now evacuation orders are in effect for Pleasant Valley, South Mountain, and the town of Jordan Valley itself, and the fire has crossed the state line into Owehee County, Idaho, pulling resources from 2 states into the same fight. What makes this fire particularly worrying isn't just its size, it's who is fighting it. Alongside professional crews, the Jordan Valley Rangeland Fire Protection Association, a volunteer group made up mostly of local ranchers, has been working around the clock for days, and by their own account, they are running low on fuel and equipment just trying to keep their trucks running. The mayor of Jordan Valley has publicly said the town itself appears safe for now, but that the surrounding rangeland and cattle operations are at serious risk. Closer to the Cascades, near the town of Sisters, the Akawa Butte Fire has burned more than 27,000 acres in Deschutes and Jefferson counties and sits at around 6% containment. It's smaller than the giants burning further east, but its location near a populated recreational corridor has made it a priority. Extreme fire behavior, including spotting, torching, and wind-driven runs, has threatened numerous structures and critical infrastructure in the area. Governor Kotek visited the fire in person, urging residents to comply fully with evacuation orders, a reminder that even fires that rank lower on the state's acreage list can still pose direct, immediate danger to specific communities. Zoom out from any single fire, and the statewide picture becomes genuinely staggering. As of July 13th, only about 2 weeks before the numbers you're hearing right now, Oregon had burned roughly 42,000 acres for the entire year. That's a slow, unremarkable start to a fire season. Then, on July 15th and 16th, a massive lightning event swept across the state, igniting close to 90 new wildfires in a span of 2 days. From that point, the acreage curve went near low, high vertical. By Friday, July 25th, the statewide total had reached about 467,000 acres. By Monday morning, July 27th, it had more than doubled again, to somewhere around 1.14 million acres burned in a single season. Put that in perspective. That total already exceeds the roughly 1.1 million acres Oregon burned across the entirety of the 2020 fire season, one of the most destructive in the state's modern history. In September 2020, a series of lightning-sparked fires in the Santiam Canyon area, including the Beachy Creek and Lion's Head fires, merged during a historic wind event and burned through communities in Marion, Clackamas, and Lynn counties, destroying thousands of structures and killing multiple people. That season remains the benchmark Oregon fire-offy. SIOs measure every subsequent bad year against, and it's the reason a statewide total already exceeding 1.1 million acres, with more than a month of peak fire season still remaining, is being treated as such a serious warning sign rather than just an unusually active summer. The fire analysts had initiated. A lie projected 2026 would land somewhere in the middle of the pack for the decade, maybe the 11th or 12th worst season out of the past 30 years. That projection is now obsolete. Whether this ends up rivaling the truly historic years will depend heavily on what the weather does over the next several weeks. But the current trajectory puts 2026 firmly among the state's worst modern fire seasons, and it's still only late July, with the traditional peak of fire season, August, not yet here. The financial toll is also becoming a real concern for state government. The 2024 fire season, for comparison, cost Oregon more than $350 million in suppression expenses and forced a special legislative session to approve an additional $218 million just to keep firefighting agencies funded through the end of that year. It's too early to say exactly how 2026's final costs will compare. But with dozens of large uncontained fires burning simultaneously and resources stretched across the state, the pressure on the state's firefighting budget is only building. Beyond the direct suppression costs, there's a longer economic tail that tends to get less attention in the early weeks of a fire season like this. Ranching operations across Malheur County, in the path of the Big Grass Fire, depend on rangeland that can take years to recover once it burns, meaning cattle producers may be dealing with reduced grazing capacity long after the smoke. Leers. Tourism-dependent communities near the John Day Fossil Beds National Monument and around Sisters are losing visitor traffic during what would normally be peak summer season, since both areas have had to implement closures. And the agricultural sector broadly faces smoke exposure risks for outdoor workers across the advisory counties, an occupational health issue, state labor, and agriculture officials tend to flag alongside every major smoke event. The air itself has become its own emergency. Oregon's Department of Environmental Quality has issued air quality advisories covering more than a dozen counties, including Baker, Crook, Gilliam, Grant, Harney, Jefferson, Malheur, Morrow, Umatilla, Union, Wallowa, Wasco, and Wheeler. In Prineville, ONI monitors have recorded air quality index readings pushing toward 300, deep in the very unhealthy to hazardous range. In Bend, 2 separate monitoring stations have logged readings above 200. Nearby, Lapine has measured around 150, still solidly in unhealthy territory. State officials are advising anyone in these zones to limit time outdoors, keep windows closed, and run air filthy. Ration if it's available. Children, older adults, and anyone with asthma, COPD, or heart disease are being told to take these advisories seriously rather than treat them as routine summer haze. Residents can check conditions directly through Oregon's smoke information resources for real-time updates by county. Zoom out one more level to the national picture, and Oregon's crisis is part of a much larger pattern playing out across the American West and beyond. As the most recent national update, 90 large wildfires are actively burning across the United States, with 10 new large incidents reported in just the last day alone. Fighting them requires more THEAG and 25,000 firefighters and support personnel nationwide, organized into 565 crews, operating 101 engines and 141 helicopters, coordinated by roughly 2 dozen. Complex incident management teams, plus additional national-level coordination organizations. Year to date, more than 42,000 individual fires have burned upward of 4 million acres across the country, a pace that is running well above the 10-year historical average for both the number of fires and the total acreage consumed. By state, Oregon is not just leading the country in large fire activity, it's in a category of its own. State officials count more than 20 named incidents with dedicated management teams currently assigned across Oregon. Minnesota and California each have 6 large fires. Washington has 5. Idaho has 3. Florida, Colorado, and Louisiana each have 2, and a handful of other states, including Utah, Wyoming, Virginia, South Carolina, and Montana, each have 1. No other state comes close to Oregon's number or scale right now. The firefighting response inside Oregon has pulled in resources far beyond typical state and local crews. Military aviation assets have been activated, including MAFS-equipped C-130 air tankers from the 302nd Airlift Wing of the Air Force Reserve, now flying missions out of Klamath Falls. Air National Guard tanker crews from Wyoming and California have also been staged at Redding, California, ready to surge north if conditions demand it. This kind of federal military mobilization for aerial firefighting typically only happens when civilian aerial firefighting capacity, contracted air tankers and helicopters, can't keep pace with demand across multiple simultaneous incidents, which tells you how stretched the system currently is. The broader coordination challenge is worth appreciating too. With 90 large fires burning simultaneously nationwide, the agencies responsible for allocating firefighting resources, primarily the National Interagency Coordination Center in Boise, Idaho, have to make constant, difficult trade-offs about which incidents get priority access to scarce assets like heavy air tankers, hotshot crews, and incident management teams. A fire threatening a populated town typically outranks a fire burning through unpopulated rangeland in that triage, even if the rangeland fire is larger in raw acreage, which helps explain why a fire like Big Grass, despite its enormous size, has a smaller assigned workforce than a fire like Roe Creek Complex, which threatens more infrastructure and more people directly. When 10 new large fires ignite in a single day, as happened most recently at the national level, that trio, G-System gets tested in real time, and it's part of why the country's most experienced wildland firefighting crews are being shuffled between incidents across several states simultaneously right now. Weather is the variable driving all of this, and unfortunately, it isn't cooperating. Forecasters are tracking widespread elevated to critical fire weather conditions, spreading across inland Northwest, the Northern Rockies, and the Northwestern Great Basin. Westerly winds in the 15 to 25 mile per hour range, with gusts up to 35. Combined with relative humidity dropping as low as 5 to 20%, and are creating textbook conditions for explosive fire growth. Temperatures near 100 degrees Fahrenheit are persisting across the Great Basin and the central and northern Rockies east of the Continental Divide. And that same hot, dry pattern is expected to expand into the central Great Basin in the coming days, rather than ease off. The National Weather Service office in Pendleton issued an urgent fire weather message covering Central Oregon's fire zones, warning of gusty winds and critically low humidity. A red flag. Warning in practical terms means that any new fire that ignites under these conditions is likely to spread rapidly and become difficult to control almost immediately, which is why officials are urging that no outdoor burning take place anywhere in the affected region right now, campfires included. It's also worth unpacking some of the fire behavior terms showing up across nearly every one of these incident reports, because they aren't just dramatic language. They describe specific, measurable fire dynamics. Long-range spotting refers to burning embers being lifted by intense heat and wind and carried well ahead of the main fire front, sometimes a mile or more, igniting new spot fires that can cut off escape routes or overwhelm containment lines crews thought were secure. Group torching describes clusters of trees or dense brush igniting almost simultaneously in an intense, fast burst of flame, a sign that fuel moisture is extremely low and fire intensity is climbing quickly. Wind-driven runs are exactly what they sound like, periods where sustained wind pushes a fire rapidly across the landscape in a specific direction, often the most danger. Rouse phase of any large fire because it can outpace evacuation timelines. And when incident reports describe several of these behaviors happening on the same fire in the same day, as they have on Bench, Row Creek, Big Grass, and Akawa Butte this past week, it signals genuinely extreme conditions rather than routine summer fire activity. It's worth stepping back and asking why 2026 turned so quickly. The answer isn't a single cause, it's a stack of contributing factors that fire scientists have been tracking for years across the American West. Oregon entered this summer following a winter and spring, with below normal snowpack in several basins, which meant less moisture, carry Ed into the dry season. Warmer spring temperatures accelerated snowmelt timing, leaving vegetation to dry out earlier than usual. Decades of fire suppression policy across much of the western United States, dating back over a century, left forests and rangelands with heavier fuel loads than they would carry under a more natural fire cycle, meaning that when fires do start, there is simply more material available to burn. Add in invasive, fast-curing grasses like cheatgrass, which dry out early and carry fire exceptionally well across open rangeland, and you have the ingredients for the kind of explosive spread seen in fires like Big Grass and Row Creek. Then add the lightning. G-event of July 15th and 16th, which alone sparked close to 90 new fires in fuel that was already primed to burn, and the rapid sustained wind events since then, and you get the acceleration curve Oregon has experienced over the past 2 weeks. None of this is unique to Oregon in isolation. It reflects a broader trend that climate researchers have documented across the western United States for more than a decade. Fire seasons, starting earlier, lasting longer, and producing more large, fast-moving fires than the historical baseline. Whether any single fire season, including this one, can be attributed directly to that broader trend versus normal year-to-year variability is a question climate scientists continue to study and debate. What isn't in dispute is the on-the-ground reality facing Oregon communities right now. More than 1,000 people under active evacuation orders, homes already lost, air quality readings in the hazardous range across a dozen-plus counties, and containment lines that, on several of the state's largest fires, are still sitting at or near 0%. For residents in the affected areas, the practical guidance from officials remains consistent. Follow evacuation orders immediately when they're issued. Don't wait to see how the fire develops. Monitor our road closures through Oregon's official trip planning resources before traveling through central and eastern Oregon, since several major highways remain closed or restricted. Sign up for local emergency alert systems in the counties currently under threat. And if you're anywhere in the advisory zones, take the air quality warning seriously, especially if you have young children, older family members, or anyone with a respiratory or cardiac condition in the household. If you're unsure whether your specific address falls inside an active evacuation zone, county sheriff's offices in Jefferson, Wheeler, and Demilure counties have been posting updated zone maps directly to their public social media pages multiple times a day, which right now is often faster than waiting for a broader news update to catch up with fast-changing conditions on the ground. This is a fast-moving, still developing disaster, and the numbers in this video will likely be outdated within days, possibly within hours. That's the nature of a fire season accelerating this quickly. What's clear right now is that Oregon is dealing with a wildfire crisis on a scale it hasn't faced since 2020. With weeks of peak fire season still ahead, dry fuel across the state, and weather conditions offering no real relief in the immediate forecast. If this update helped you understand what's actually happening on the ground in Oregon right now, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this reporting reach more people who need accurate information during an emergency like this. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss next update as containment numbers change and new incidents develop. And if you know anyone living in Central or Eastern Oregon, in Jefferson, Wheeler, Malheur, Deschutes, or any of the surrounding counties, share this video with them directly. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from and how the smoke and fire activity is affecting your area. It helps other viewers get a clearer, real-time picture beyond what any single news source can capture. Stay safe out there, and we'll keep tracking this story as it develops.